We are Red Star Report.
Good evening, Red Star Rebels. In this episode, we close out the month of May for occupied California as the blitzkrieg of anti-California values policies flows unabated out of the MAGAverse. This is podcast season 5, episode number 8, and we are Red Star Report. And in this edition, in our Pacifica news update, we will look at recent news stories you may have missed from a California Resistance perspective. The Pedro Baez report brings us airport outages, and tonight on Talking Points, is the California initiative process still a viable path to California independence? But first, Trump's big, beautiful FU-2-CA bill, that what Californians can expect from it, and what can we do about it? All this and more coming up on this episode, so let's chat, Rebels. I'm Hal Lohr, we are Red Star Report, and this is Voices for the California Nation.
Well, I want the Senate and the senators to change, to make the changes they want, and we'll go back to the House and we'll see if we can get them. In some cases, those changes maybe are something I'd agree with, to be honest. It happens. But we've had a very good response from the Senate, and I don't know how Democrats can't vote for it. If they don't vote for it, they're talking about a 68% tax increase. Remember that. If the Democrats don't vote, it's a 68% tax increase, which is ridiculous. And one of the things that's being covered indirectly is the fact that we'll be lowering the cost of drugs from 50 to 85% under Trump. And it's going to have indirectly something to do, not directly, but indirectly something to do with the bill, the one big, beautiful bill. And it is a big, beautiful bill. And so I think the Senate is going to get there. I hope they're going to get there.
Okay. Wow. This is Voices for the California Nation, and let's talk about how what I call Trump's big, beautiful FU-2-CA bill will affect Californians. Because for us, the truth is that it's almost 1,120 pages of the Trump regime's fascist agenda, barely disguised as a 2025 federal budget bill, complete with massive tax breaks for the wealthy few and death by 1,000 cuts for everyday Californians. And as of last Thursday morning, the House of Representatives, with only one vote to spare, squeaked through that big, beautiful bill that advances America's dictator Donald Trump's agenda to the Senate. So, first things first, that 68% tax increase line, come on, man, that's a scare tactic to justify the fact that the big, beautiful American FU to California part of this MAGA budget is rooted in continuing the corporate giveaways from Trump's 2017 tax cuts from his first administration. A little leftover red meat scare tactic to hide how this 2025 budget blatantly shifts America's economic priorities to funnel tax dollars into the donor class and give tax breaks to the filthy rich, while it punishes poor people, particularly in anti-MAGA American places like California. And of course, Democrats have once again failed to rally anti-Trump support, even after calling it the big backstabbing bill and warning that this package will hurt America's working class and lower-income families. Content with the shaky narrative of false hope reminders they pitch on MSNBC that the bill still needs to go through the U.S. Senate, where some GOP members may clutch their pearls about Social Security or Medicare cuts for a few moments just to get some publicity before they sign the bill in Republican lockstep, lather, rinse, repeat. So, looking at what this big, beautiful American FU to California spending package may be the most closely California GOP watched provision of the spending bill was the cap on how much SALT-rich taxpayers can deduct on their federal taxes to offset California's state and local taxes. Seems California's House Republicans, always ready to ignore the poor to fight for their portfolios, promised to vote no on the bill unless a $10,000 cap levied in 2017 was increased to $40,000 for people with incomes above $500,000. Bless their little privileged hearts, I'm sure. Oh, and big surprise, I guess because California is a sanctuary state for women's reproductive rights, the big, beautiful American FU-to-California bill blocks Medicaid funds for Planned Parenthood. Again, even though federal money already doesn't pay for abortion services. But hey, because California's state Medicaid funds do, Planned Parenthood must be federally crucified and defunded in the name of Christofascism's superstitious ideal of punishing low-income California women, particularly women in underserved communities who rely on Planned Parenthood for life-saving cancer screenings, birth control, STI testing, and other health care services. Another teaspoon of salt for the wounds of working-class and poor Californians. Included in the bill is the community engagement requirement that will mandate that able-bodied adults without dependents work or participate in work programs for at least 80 hours a month or be enrolled in an educational program. Because Trump's Congressional Budget Office thinks mandatory work requirements will reduce federal spending by $280 billion over the next decade, that's after 8.6 million Americans lose their health care coverage. And for Californians again, despite being a donor state, that includes up to 2 million Californians, including children, seniors, veterans, and working families, who could lose Medi-Cal benefits. A move that even Gavin Newsom had proposed a rollback of access to Medi-Cal for low-income immigrants without legal status as a way to bridge California's now donor state budget woes. But hey, it's not all bad news. I mean, if you're rich, it's not anyway. And a little something for those underserved trust fund babies. The bill increases the estate tax exemption threshold to $15 million in 2026 to alleviate the long suffering of the fabulously wealthy under what Republicans have called the death tax that's triggered as a federal tax when a high-dollar estate or property is transferred upon death. All while federal food funds through SNAP programs get chopped by $267 billion over the next decade. Changes that the California Budget and Policy Center says will reduce or exclude aid for people who rely on CalFresh to afford basic food needs. But who needs food if they can't breathe the air, right? Because while California willfully pursues the anti-American goal of clean energy in a giveaway to America's fossil fuel industry, several energy tax credits that have been around for decades will end under this big, beautiful American FU to California bill. That includes the termination of credits for energy-efficient homes, clean electricity production and electric vehicles, and phasing out credits for wind and solar. All this, and we haven't even talked about the trillion-dollar military budget with its new Golden Dome missile shield, or the $46.5 billion to revive Trump's wall along the U.S.-Mexico border and fund more deportation agenda projects, or the $330 billion in budget cuts for student loan programs making it harder to cancel student loan debt, along with a 21% tax increase on university endowments, or provisions authorizing sales of hundreds of thousands of acres of public land in the western U.S. for fossil fuel drilling and strip mining, and the list goes on and on and on, but you get the idea. So yeah, it's kind of a big, beautiful FU to California budget bill that basically means we'll have to pay for and suffer through the MAGA American agenda Californians don't support. Let that sink in, and then figure out where you stand. This is Voices for the California Nation. In the first of our Pacifica News updates for today, Homeland Security subpoenas California Immigrant Assistance Program. In its latest legal challenge, the Department of Homeland Security has subpoenaed California's Cash Assistance Program for immigrants by demanding a slew of records from LA County to determine if individuals in the United States illegally received payments stemming from Social Security dating back to 2021. The Legal Action centers on California's Assistance Program for Immigrants, or CAPI, providing cash assistance to certain aged, blind, disabled legal immigrants ineligible for Social Security payments due to their immigration status. And that's just it. Recipients of Los Angeles County's CAPI program must be non-citizens who have been lawfully admitted into the U.S. and are designed for recipients who are age 65 or over, blind, or disabled. But naturally, according to the Department of Homeland Security, more than 2 million ineligible illegal aliens received a Social Security number in fiscal 2024 alone, even though the Public Policy Institute of California estimates that about 1.1 million people receive Supplemental Security Income, or SSI, or State Supplementary Payments, SSP, monthly grants, with just over half of all payments granted to those 65 and older. That number includes about 15,000 legal residents who do not meet additional non-citizen criteria for Social Security payments. But last month, President Trump issued an executive order aimed at canceling incentives for individuals living illegally in the United States by attacking humanitarian policies in sanctuary states like the California Republic. Trump's Sharpie pen signed memo directs Homeland Security, Labor and Health and Human Services, the Social Security Administration, and the U.S. Attorney General to, quote, ensure ineligible illegal aliens do not receive funds from Social Security programs and prioritize civil and criminal enforcement against states or localities for potential violations of federal law, which they just created. In a statement, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem accused radical left politicians in California of prioritizing immigrants in the U.S. over American citizens by giving illegal aliens access to cash benefits. Vowing that the Trump administration is working to identify abuse and exploitation of public benefits to make sure those in the country illegally are not receiving federal benefits or other financial incentives to stay illegally. If you are an illegal immigrant, you should leave now, Noem said. The gravy train is over. So while this subpoena focuses only on Los Angeles County, it's just the beginning. All grossly obtuse statements at best that ignore the fact that a lawfully admitted immigrant person residing in California is not actually an illegal alien. They are legal aliens. And of course, Kristi Noem has conveniently forgotten that those so-called federal benefits and incentive funds are historically not only legally determined for disbursement at the state, county, and local level, but those federal dollars technically belong to the nation state of California, who, despite being a donor state, still pays up over 14% of all federal tax revenue, all leading up to yet another pointless Trumpian ego-based U.S. versus California court battle that did not need to happen because MAGA America prioritizes trivial cruelty over solving any real problems.
This is a California Resistance action item, disruption of U.S. deportations. To report ICE agent activities or raids, or for help locating someone in ICE custody, call the ICIRR hotline at 1-855-435-7693. That's 1-855-435-7693. Hotline has multilingual operators.
Okay, here's a story that quite refreshingly doesn't have the name Trump in it. Los Angeles quietly built the longest light rail line on Earth. Los Angeles Metro's A line, also known as the Blue Line, has served millions since it was built in 1990, and in 2023, it broke the record for being the longest light rail line in the world. With 44 stops spanning 48.5 miles between Azusa and Long Beach, the A line is just one technical achievement in LA's massive public transport system, and now looking to extend service to Pomona with adding 4 new stops this summer. Originally known as the Blue Line when it was built in 1990, riders still refer to the A line by the old name when it first ran between downtown LA and Long Beach. But with additions and upgrades over the next 3 decades, in 2014, the Regional Transit Connector project added a tunnel to DTLA, creating a new connection from the A line to the L line. By 2023, the A line incorporated the L line's former Union Station Pasadena-Azusa service and added more stations around the tunnel. That's how LA Metro became the longest light rail system in the world at 48.5 miles, surpassing Belgium's 42-mile coast tram. The A line carries about 15 million riders each year, with a 2-hour journey from downtown Long Beach and finally reaching its northern terminus at APU Citrus College in Azusa. And after all that travel, it's still not done expanding because the Foothill Extension project is well underway. The $1.5 billion first phase extends the A line from Azusa with a 9.1-mile segment, adding stations at Glendora, San Dimas, Laverne, and Pomona North. This section will begin passenger service in the summer, with the exact opening date to be announced later, and 2 more stations at Claremont and Montclair being added by 2030, stretching the A line to a total of 58 world record miles. See? Not all stories have to have Donald Trump in them.
90.7 KPFK, Los Angeles.
And just in case this month you were starting to think for a moment that the Trump regime's anti-immigrant hate might not be completely based on white supremacy, this month a group of 49 white South Africans departed their homeland on a private chartered jet, having been granted full U.S. refugee status. The group, which included families and small children not separated or otherwise abused by the U.S. Border Patrol or ICE officials, arrived at Dulles International Airport outside Washington, D.C., according to Colin Msibi, a spokesperson for South Africa's Transport Ministry. This is just the first privileged white minority group of South Afrikaners to be relocated after President Trump issued an executive order on February 7th, accusing South Africa's majority black-led government of racial discrimination against them and announcing a program to offer them relocation in the U.S., an accusation the South African government said was completely false, denying that any Afrikaners are being persecuted. The Trump administration has fast-tracked their applications of these white South Afrikaners while pausing other refugee programs, halting non-white arrivals from Afghanistan, Iraq, most of sub-Saharan Africa, and other countries in a move being challenged in court. Refugee groups have questioned why the white South Africans are being prioritized ahead of people from countries racked by war and natural disasters where vetting for refugee status in the U.S. usually takes years. But the Trump administration openly accuses the South African government of pursuing racist anti-white policies through affirmative action laws and land expropriation laws it says targets white South Afrikaners' property. The South African government counters those claims, accusing the white Afrikaners and the Trump regime of misinformation, where there is no racism against Afrikaners and no land has been expropriated. The government of South Africa also denies U.S. claims that Afrikaners are being targeted in racially motivated attacks in rural communities when whites are amongst the most economically privileged in that country, and the South African government said there was no justification for them being relocated, but said it wouldn't stop them and respected their freedom of choice. This flight of Afrikaners was the first in a much larger-scale relocation effort. White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller told reporters, saying that was what was happening to Afrikaners in South Africa fits the textbook definition of why the refugee program was first created. And this persecution based on a protected characteristic, in this case race, this is race-based persecution, he said. And in fact, a document obtained and released by the Associated Press claims the relocation of Afrikaners was a stated priority of the Trump administration. A hideously ironic statement on the blatant prioritization of white immigrants from a federal official given the rampant racial profiling, selective ICE enforcement, and casual cruelty being committed against brown people under the Trump regime's brutal anti-immigrant crackdowns. There are around 2.7 million white Afrikaners among South Africa's minority population. In a modern South Africa with a population of 62 million, which is more than 80% black. Still, many South Africans are puzzled by claims that Afrikaners are persecuted and meet the requirements to be relocated as refugees. They are part of South Africa's everyday multiracial life, with many successful business leaders and some serving in the government as cabinet ministers and deputy ministers. Their language is widely spoken and recognized as an official language, and churches and other institutions reflecting Afrikaner culture hold prominence in almost every city and town. But the Trump administration has criticized South Africa on several fronts, and in February, an executive order cut all U.S. funding to South Africa over what it said was an anti-white stance, and also accused it of pursuing an anti-American foreign policy. It cited South Africa's ties with Iran and its move to lodge a genocide case against Israel over the war in Gaza as examples of it taking aggressive positions towards the United States. Actions which in no way, shape, or form make the admission of white privileged Afrikaners, refugees, into the United States in the middle of an all-out persecution of any and all non-white immigrants look like anything but American white supremacy in action. And in our final Pacifica update for this episode, MAGA bill will make all porn a federal crime. Last year, when the Heritage Foundation, the right-wing think tank made up of Republicans from red states, generally with America's highest rates of rape, unwanted pregnancy, and spousal and child abuse, launched Project 2025, a blueprint for a Republican authoritarian regime led by a president who was himself under investigation in 2018 for involvement in allegedly paying presidential campaign hush money to silence adult film star Stormy Daniels. Well, from the "you can't make this stuff up" file, one of these cynical paragons of virtue Project 2025 goals amounts to yet another thinly veiled attack on California industry in the name of America's Christo-fascist puritanical ideals: the permanent criminalization of the adult film industry. Another industry where California, regardless of America's pretending to be outraged over it, is a recognized global leader in, with taxable revenue of around $13 billion a year and directly employing roughly 6,000 people in Greater LA alone. Just to give you an idea how big that really is, the NFL is a $12 billion a year biz. Now, Republican Senator Mike Lee from Utah, a state that Westworld magazine clocked at 94 Pornhub page views per capita a year, recently introduced the Interstate Obscenity Definition Act, IOTA, which would effectively criminalize all pornographic content nationwide by legally redefining what it means to be obscene, stating that for years obscenity has been all but a defunct legal category that narrowly defines speech that remains unprotected by the First Amendment. Senator Mike Lee wants to expand this legal category to include virtually all visual representations of sex so that any picture, image, graphic image, file, film, videotape, or other visual depiction of any media that appeals to the prurient interest in nudity, sex, or excretion would be considered criminalized as deeply illicit materials. A newly minted Christo-fascist definition of obscenity so broad that it could effectively criminalize such binge-watch shows as Game of Thrones, Deadwood, or The Sopranos, with legislation focused on punishing the creators and distribution of any form of so-called racy material. Claiming obscenity isn't protected by the First Amendment, the Interstate Obscenity Definition Act would pave the way for the prosecution of adult content disseminated across state lines, or from foreign countries and opens the door to federal restrictions or bans on anything the Trump regime decides to label as pornography. A slippery slope with obviously destructive ramifications for California's long-established adult film and entertainment industry. The MAGA Right Heritage Foundation has openly stated in its mandate for leadership that Project 2025 seeks to crush what they call the smut industry, defining pornography as the omnipresent propagation of transgender ideology and sexualization of children, and demanding that the people who produce and distribute it should be imprisoned, and the telecommunications and technology firms that facilitate its spread should be shuttered. But much like the way the Trump regime anti-immigration policies hinge on unsupported numbers of immigrant crime, the Christian fundamentalist MAGA right anti-porn argument focuses on the unscientifically verified but possible impact that pornography may or may not have on young American web users and children. A possibly disingenuous point of view, considering it fails to produce any legitimate sign of an internet porno disaster scenario after 50-ish years of available cable and or online adult content. Children who through simple parental control software may or may not have access to adult content anyway in a country where over the past decade many states have passed legislation designed to curb youth access to porn, much of which is still being hammered out in court. Still, all this leaves questions for the future of California's adult entertainment industry, who, like California's high-tech industry, green energy companies, import-export companies, and agricultural businesses, find themselves in the uncertain crosshairs of MAGA America's open hostility to California's socio-economic prosperity. And now, Red Star Report brings you another Pedro Baez report on airport outages under MAGA rule. So please, fasten your seatbelts and return your trays to their upright position.
And welcome once again to the BR, the Baez Report. We have a lot to talk about today. Outages continue at Newark Airport and now in other airports. And with the summer travel season beginning today, it could be catastrophic. Hopefully, there will be no accidents. There will be no lives lost. But so long as the airports continue to utilize outdated equipment, staff shortages of controllers, and the like, there will be chaos. The rest of the world has modernized, and the U.S., once a leader in aviation, now continues to lag behind the rest of the world's populations. Now, close to 245,000 jobs were lost during the first Trump administration. What's going to happen once the 90-day period of the tariff freeze ends? How are we going to deal with that? Will there be more job losses, or will that pale in comparison to what's going to occur? Cuts to FEMA, food banks, school lunch programs, and cuts close to $1 billion have occurred with regards to the recent budget that was passed by the GOP. AmeriCorps had close to 200,000 volunteers prior to these cuts. What's going to happen there? Now, what we have is former President Biden has stage 4 prostate cancer. It was revealed this week. A lot of people are saying, why didn't we know about this sooner? Well, under HIPAA, that's confidential. If someone wishes to let you know that they have an affliction, that's up to them. I'm a type 2 diabetic. I don't mind if people know about it, but that's me. That's not everybody. And I can understand why President Biden did not reveal it, because that would have been used as fodder by Donald Trump, saying, I told you he wasn't right. I told you he was Sleepy Joe. I told you there was something wrong with him. Well, what are you going to do? Elias Rodriguez, who is he? He's the one who was taken into custody after the shooting of Sarah Milgram, 26 years of age, and Yaron Levchinsky, 30, who were leaving a reception for young diplomats after 9 p.m. on Wednesday. They were on the verge of being engaged. They were employed by the Israeli embassy as aides. They were not involved in any of policies by Benjamin Netanyahu. And it was a tragedy that these two innocent individuals were gunned down and murdered, allegedly by Elias Rodriguez. I hope he gets what is coming to him. And last but not least, this commentator would like to pay his condolences and respects to the family and constituents of Representative Jerry Connolly of Virginia, who went home this past Wednesday, May the 21st. He was 75 years of age, and he served 8 terms in Congress. And that's my commentary for this week. Thank you for listening, and as always, be kind, be good, be careful, and be safe. And most of all, don't let anybody put you down. Have a good weekend. And as always, adiosito.
Thank you to Pedro Baez, and you can also look for the Baez Report on YouTube.
Other important news out of California, proposing an initiative to have California become an independent country. Secretary of State Dr. Shirley Ann Weber announced that the proponent of a new initiative was cleared to begin collecting petition signatures on January 23rd of this year, so on Thursday. The AG prepares the legal title and the summary that is required to appear on the initiative petitions. Official language is complete. The AG forwards it to the proponent and to the Secretary of State. Then the initiative circulates for signatures, which is where it's at now. If this is enacted, it will be on the November 2028 ballot should California leave the United States and become a free and independent country. If at least 50% of registered voters participate in that election and at least 55% say yes, it would constitute a vote of no confidence in the United States of America. So if you live in California, do you want to become an independent country? I am so curious to find out if this goes through in the next 4 years.
Okay, this is Talking Points, and this is a question that I didn't see coming. Because since 2016, one of the primary goals focused on by the California independence movement has hinged around getting the question of an independent California on a California state election ballot through the California Initiative process. The idea has always been for the achievement of greater California autonomy up to and including secession from the United States to happen it must happen entirely through peaceful and legal processes. That's not surprising when part of the original 2015 CalExit movement's platform openly stated that California independence was not going to be the cause of American Civil War 2.0. But now fast forward to 2025, and some of those early CalExit backers have launched a California Independence Initiative for the third time in 9 years, and to all intents and purposes, there's nothing wrong with that. Although it probably would have been better if the people who launched the latest initiative had learned from past mistakes by planning and coordinating with other more active and robust branches of today's movement, and made sure the infrastructure had the money and people in place to gather the 800,000 plus signatures needed to pass the 2025 initiative. Which leads me to the talking point question. Is the California initiative process still a viable path to California independence? Maybe, but probably not, considering we're hearing multiple reports back from people who are out there trying to gather signatures that a lot of people who say they would vote for a CalExit ballot measure are afraid to sign their legal name to an initiative. Because there's no doubt Californians were living in a vastly different world in 2015 than we see now in 2025. A post-democratic world with the modern reality that the American federal government doesn't hesitate to use law enforcement and the courts to promote a hostile federal agenda that silences free speech and persecutes political dissidents. A reality that predictably put the entire California initiative process subject to the possibility of creating a self-incriminating political opposition list that a fascist American regime is just a corrupt Supreme Court decision away from having total access to. And the fear of this was illustrated pretty plainly by the fact that even where the latest YouGov poll shows that 61% of Californians say the state would actually be better off if it seceded peacefully, 62% of respondents said they didn't think the peaceful and legal breakup would be possible. A sticking point that can guarantee would have come into discussion if the latest CalExit initiative had been more broadly reviewed before it was filed. So, discrete support for California independence may be greater than 60% and rising, with people willing to anonymously vote for California's eventual secession, but no sane Californian would want to voluntarily end up on an FBI file watch list by possibly signing their name to what could become their own political arrest warrant. So, does that lead to the California initiative process still being a viable path to California independence? It doesn't look good. And possibly to make matters worse, any legal path to independence that relies on the initiative process would require a California state government not infested with politicians eager to stepping stone their way from Sacramento to Washington, D.C., and the donor pig trough there. Consider our governor, who constantly uses California independence talking points like fifth largest economy in the world and global leader against climate change, but his Democratic political ambitions to be U.S. president means even the slightest possibility of supporting CalExit as a viable solution to American fascism becomes politically inconvenient. And let's not forget that a peaceful and U.S. legal independence would also need a functional federal government that was not openly hostile to everything California. Because even though 61% of Californians have shown that in a YouGov poll they wouldn't oppose California independence, there's little chance that MAGA American federal government officials could ever legislate a separation in good faith. Not when a stated goal of fascist America is to crush and punish California resistance to the full extent of the policies and executive orders of the Trump regime, which makes using the initiative process to move California's state government towards secession in 2025 little more than an expensive symbolic gesture. A symbolic gesture that might have some benefit in raising CalExit awareness, but ultimately can't succeed in swaying a grievance-driven America bent on retribution against our so-called woke California values. And of course, let's not forget lesser America's desire to keep the world's fourth or fifth largest economy enslaved as a cash cow donor state to be milked dry to feed America's failed red states. So, is the California initiative process still a viable path to to California independence. In 2025, it's not looking so good, particularly when you have a Trump regime desperate to force American white supremacist ideals down the national throat using mass deportations to cast out America's enemies from within. I mean, you would think this would make sense if we look at California secession as simply a 40 million strong self-deportation of hated commie Californians out of Trump's America, but the problem is America believes the U.S. Constitution, which can now be ruthlessly enforced or utterly ignored unless otherwise inconvenient, has red state America thinking they have some divine right to legally occupy California forever. Much the way King George III could have argued that the American Revolution didn't count because rebellions against the King of England were predictably illegal under English law. So it's unlikely that King Trump and his MAGA minions would see it differently, and nobody would be surprised that a fascist American empire would be outraged at what they saw as the modern theft of what America had historically stolen, California state initiative or not. This is Talking Points. And that's podcast number 8 for the 2025 season. For the next 2 weeks, Red Star Report will be taking a break for some long-needed updates, but don't worry, we'll be back soon. Until then, more Red Star Report information, check out our website at redstarreport.com. Please subscribe to our Red Star Report YouTube channel. Go to Red Star Report on our Facebook page, Twitter page, Instagram page, and give us a like, give us a follow. Because if you want to support the real California independence movement's #New CalExit Media Group, it's all about the algorithms. And seriously, click that link below and pledge support for our friends at listener-supported radio, KPFK, 90.7 FM Los Angeles. Or better yet, call them up at 818-985-5735 and make a donation, and it won't hurt my feelings if you tell them they need to put Red Star Report on the radio. Because KPFK deserves your support. And of course, a great new show. Our thanks to all our Red Star Rebels for watching. We are Red Star Report.